judge? Well, you just kind of earned it. If you recall, one of the things that Solomon did, which made him famous for his wisdom, was had the two women fighting over whose baby it was, because one had died in the night, and Solomon said, well, let's take the baby and split it in two. And the one woman said, okay, then. The other one said, no, she can have her. And he gave, that was the mama. And so he was really, really wise. And Queen of Sheba, she was just amazed at how smart, how wise Solomon was. And we go through history, though, and, the battles belong to the men. I mean, the conquest of Canaan was Joshua. Leading through the wilderness was Moses. It was just a man's game. And women in Jewish society, I don't have to tell you, they didn't have a whole lot of rights. It was, as a matter of fact, women in America didn't get to vote until a couple years ago. It was a thing. Medieval women, they just were property of their husbands over in Europe. So here we are in the book of Judges, and this Deborah is a really unique woman. Now, what we know about Judges is Israel moved into Canaan, but they were satisfied to dwell with the Canaanites. They didn't run them out. They were supposed to. They were supposed to run them out. God sent hornets to help. But as soon as they got enough real estate to live on, they just said, this'll do. Now, here's what we know. I mean, this shouldn't be controversial. But it shouldn't be. It says in Acts 17:26 that God set the bounds of our habitation. And so the continents in Scripture were divided. Scientists agree to that. What the scientists don't agree is it happened over a few hundred years rather than a few million years. And God had established the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth and hybrids thereof on different continents and divided them up. And then people began to travel. As we got the means to travel, I mean, you can make it anywhere in the world in a day. I think 16 hours, I think you can make it to Australia. And so there are no bounds of habitation anymore. When we were hearing all the news on the southern border, coming across the southern border without very, very little resistance, with very little resistance, people coming who were Chinese, Romanian, I mean, all kinds of, how'd they do it? Well, they flew over to Mexico and then came across the very, very porous border, or almost non-existent border. So over the years, the bounds of our habitation have kind of been destroyed. And that has caused problems. If you look across America, we've got dissension along racial lines. Europe has developed a terrible problem with Muslim migrants because what people don't realize about Islam, it is not just religious practice, it is accompanied by civil and legislative Sharia law. They want Sharia law. They are pledged to Sharia law. They are pledged to advanced Islam to become the one world religion. They are determined that to be the case. And so you say, well, I know a person that's Muslim, a very nice person. Well, they may very well be a nice person. But still, the motivating factor behind them is the fact that Islam is determined and always was determined to be a worldwide religion. And they're not very tolerant of people who don't embrace Islam. Muhammad had been disgraced in Mecca and just went down to Medina and just forced all of those people into Islam. That's the way they roll. And I know you may say, well, Wayne, that's kind of racist of you. Well, okay. Do some research and you'll see that they are all about forced adoption of Islam. Now, when Israel moved into Canaan, God said, get rid of the people that are there, the Canaanites. Now, there weren't that many people. But, and they could have been, God sent the hornets, says so in Deuteronomy and other places in Exodus. God sent the hornets, and they could have been sent to other places, but they didn't do it. And so that's what plagued Israel for their entire existence. And so what they did is they actually made slaves and tradesmen out of these current inhabitants of Canaan rather than drive them out. So that's where Israel went to live. Then the vicious cycle that I've talked about each week, we've been looking at the book of Judges. God sends a judge to deliver people from oppression. Why the oppression? Because they intermingled with the other nations, and the other nations wasn't having it, and so they would oppress them. They would come in and dominate Israel. It's supposed to be Israel's land, but they would be dominated by these people that were supposed to have been driven out. So then the people get a judge, and the judge delivers them from this oppression. And the people serve God for a period of time. Then the people become lax in their commitment to God. Now this, you may be looking at this, that looks like me. That's what's happened to me in several cycles of my lifetime. Then they forsake God's leadership. When God chastises them by delivering them into the oppression from their enemies, then they cry out to God for deliverance. And what we see in the book of Judges is they go back to number 1, and it's a continuous cycle. And it kind of reminds you of our giant swings. It used to did not matter whether a Republican or Democrat was in the White House. Life was kind of the same. Didn't change much. John Kennedy was the one that went head-to-head with Khrushchev, and he was a Democrat. But over the years, the landscape has changed, and now we have extremes actually in both parties. But the extremes seem to have a big voice in the Democrat Party, to the point to where, I've said it, and I'll say it again. For years, I just didn't want to get too deep into politics, but today I'll say that if we don't have a Republican to follow Donald Trump, then I think our nation's going to be in deep problems, because they're going to take us way back to ridiculous things on the left, like there's no distinction between genders. It's just whatever you feel. And that is so ludicrous that you say, well, how can anybody actually believe that? Well, I tell you, I've been talking about current times and the future for 50 years. And I didn't see that one coming. I mean, I really didn't see that one coming. That we would run to a place in our society where if you're a man and you want to be a woman, you can just say so. Who knew? And I've studied, I know about gender fluidity, and I know about, I've looked at it and studied it, and it's just so bizarre. It makes you wonder how that sound minds can embrace it. And if you talk to Democrats, politicians, many of them, they'll say they don't embrace it. But when the time comes for them to vote and prove that they don't embrace it, they embrace it, because politics today is a team sport. Amen. I mean, it's a corrupt sport, right and left, and yet, you know, I like our corrupt people and I don't like their corrupt people. Well, we've already seen 2 cycles of this problem with Israel falling away and then coming back, and you know, God delivering them with the judge. And we've only covered 3 chapters because that's what the book of Judges is about. In chapter 4, which is where we are today, it's the Canaanite king Jabin. And here's where we start, verse 1. When Ehud, remember he was the guy that was the left-handed guy that pulled the knife out and slammed it into Eglon, the king, and then they had peace after that. And Ehud finally died. And when he did, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth Haggim. On the end of a Hebrew word, by the way, means it's plural usually. So there are a bunch of must have been a bunch of hogs there at Haggim. So Israel slips. That was actually funny, Brad. Don't mock me. So Israel slips again, and they've gotten away. They had a king, a judge, Ehud, and apparently he served them well, but after he's dead, they lose the vision. That's what happens to us every 4 years. That's what's happened in politics. That's why England right now, UK, is just a mess. And they can go from one extreme to the other just because of the leadership. Well, here Israel slips once again. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron. And for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. Now this is not Israel, a situation of just saying, yeah, we don't want to be controlled by these people anymore. They were being oppressed by these Canaanites. And they had F-35s, and they had, well, what they had were 800, 900 chariots of iron. That's a lot of chariots of iron. And so they faced a significant military force this time. They weren't just fighting for their independence, they were being oppressed, and they needed some relief. Now we get to Deborah. Deborah, a prophetess. Now, she didn't just get the title of prophetess. She knew things. And she had developed a reputation of being a very wise person. And so people went to her for advice, and also people then started going to her to settle like disputes. She earned it the right way. She was just a born leader. And in the Old Testament, you know, they didn't view women with a lot of esteem. So how in the world did she become judged? By just knowing stuff. A prophetess, when the scripture says she was a prophetess, that means that she could convey the mind of God on issues, and they recognized it, and they began to have a lot of respect for her. Had an inside track with God. So what is it that people are really looking for? It says, and she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah, had a palm tree named after her, between Ramah and Bethel, in the mountains of Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. She had her own location, had her own shingle out there. She had become the de facto go-to gal for the wisdom of God, and she'd earned her place as a judge. And it turns out that they deferred to Deborah to solve their interpersonal conflicts. Why was that? Well, take you to 1 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul makes a point. Let no one despise your youth. Timothy was young, probably early 20s. Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word and conduct and love, in spirit and faith and purity. Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. These are qualities that they saw in Deborah. And Paul's writing to young Timothy, and he's saying, look, they're not going to respect you for your age because you ain't got no age. And you know, it's a hard life. I was pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church in 1973. I turned 24 in July of 1973, but for the first 6 months I was 23-year-old pastor. All I knew really at that point was some courses I'd taken in. I was still in Bible college in Florida at the time, and listen to those elder preachers talk about their experiences. And I didn't have any experience except I'd been in the Marine Corps 4 years, and so kind of understood, you know, how that worked. But here I was now, 23 years old, pastor of a church, and it was exciting. Actually, we started a bus route picking up kids, and we actually quintupled the attendance of the church in just a few weeks, and half the church was new people that had come, country folk, and the other half were bus kids. And these bus kids, now you're going to have, if you're young, you won't really identify. And maybe you weren't in this world back then. You were in the world, but maybe you weren't in the same world I was. We could go out on Saturday and go door to door, just cold knocking doors, and say, and I'm from Emmanuel Baptist Church. We go in pairs. I'm from Emmanuel Baptist Church, and we have a really dynamic Sunday school and kids church, and we love to pick up your kids to come to church on Sunday, and we'll pick them up in a bus. They've never met us before, never seen us. There was no internet to check us out. And you know what these people would do? They'd let us take their kids. I mean, they'd let us come next morning, pick up their kids on a bus. It was a bright yellow bus. It wasn't school bus yellow. It was bright yellow, canary yellow. And we'd fill that bus up and bring them to church. Well, the other folks in the church, the people who weren't kids, what do you think top of their mind was? How much these kids giving? I mean, you could take up an offering with 45 kids, and you'd come up with $2. You know, and we were giving them snacks and a really good time. Then we take them home, and we had a few parents that got saved as a result of the kids, but not nearly enough to satisfy the old timers in the church, saying, "Well, they're eating our church up. They're tearing it up. We got all these broken things." The place was kind of a dump anyway. And so when they say something got broken, I couldn't prove that the kids did it because lots of stuff was broken when we came. And so it was a tough one. But I'll tell you this, as a 23-year-old pastor, I didn't know much about what I was doing. I just shouted and screamed and said, "We're going to do it this way." And turned out with the congregation, they didn't much care for me, and I didn't much care for them. I mean, we'd had great success, but at the expense of having all of these kids running around the church, and a lot of them just didn't like that. Now, when I went there, they averaged 14, 15 a week. When I left there, they averaged about 85, 90 a week, and that was in a year. But still, the success was not offset in their minds by the problem with all the kids. And I didn't recognize a lot of that stuff. And so I just insisted on having my own way. I was kind of, if you upset me during the week, you're gonna be somewhere in that message on Sunday morning. Because that's just the way I was taught to roll, So if you don't want to be in the message, don't cross Wayne. I really did not earn the respect of those people. Never did. It was a good ride for a year. It taught me a lot. And here's the number one thing it taught me. Don't ever call a pastor who's 23 years old to be a pastor of a church. Because you won't really respect him. You're just not going to respect him. You're not going to think he's been around you. But you know what I did? I'll tell you what I did. I wore a 3-piece suit every day of the week. And when I went out places, people would say, "You're a preacher, aren't you?" "How'd you guess?" Like, what are you, a wizard or something? I'd go into a department store and they'd think I was the manager. They'd come and ask me questions. I worked at exactly this. Let no one despise my youth. I didn't want that to be the case. So that's where I picked up the habit of I said, well, I think actually before I went there, I never used profanity. I never used the euphemisms for profanity. I just felt like I had a testimony that I needed to preserve, and I needed to act older than my age. But when I look at the pictures, I look like a 15-year-old. But I needed to act older than my age in order to get their respect. Well, that was a mild obstacle to compare to Deborah. Deborah had the qualities that people saw that made them realize that she is truly a prophetess of God. And so she already had the respect from all the people, and say whatever you want to about women leadership, but she'd earned it. And they respected her for it. Then she sent and called for Barak. I know you want to call it Barak, but there's no C in there. The son of Abinoam from Kadesh in Naphtali, which is one of the tribes, said to him, "Has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor? Take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali," one of the tribes, and the sons of Zebulun, which is one of the other tribes, and the northern tribes. So there's no confusion right here. She says, here's what the Lord told me. The Lord said this, Barak, General Barak, rally the troops, and I want you to go up and fight the battle for our people. And against you I will deploy Sisera. She's even telling him who the enemy will be. I mean, doesn't get much better than that, does it? The commander of Jabin's army, and his chariots and his multitude at the river of Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hand. Now, she's got the respect of the people. They go to her for judgment, and she's telling the general, listen, God's told me that you got to go fight this battle. She has a lot of details. She knows where. She even knows how it's going to end. God will deliver him into your hand. And Barak said to her, if you go with me, then I'll go. But if you not go with me, I will not go. That was one powerful woman, wasn't it? Now, why does General Barak need a woman with him in battle? Well, how do you test a prophet? Test a prophet by saying, if she's so sure I'll win, then she shouldn't have any problem going with me. If she's so sure I will prevail, then let's see if she'll put her money where her mouth is, and see if she will actually go with me. Now, she knew her place, and here's what she said. So she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Now, actually, you think that's Deborah, don't you? That's not really what turns out. Yeah. Spoiler. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. So she doesn't hesitate, but she says, you know, if I go, I'm going to get the credit. She's probably speaking of herself there. And they did win, but not until she decided to go with them. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. He went up with 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went up with them. Apparently, Deborah being in the presence of them gave them the confidence to realize that, yeah, it's going to turn out well. Now, I'm reasonably certain that Barak made both of these 2 points to the recruits. He says, number one, Deborah says we'll win. And you know Deborah, when she says it, it always happens. And she's going with us. So that's how he got the recruits. Because otherwise they're thinking, why would I want to go? Now Heber the Kenite, of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had separated himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent near the terebinth tree at Zaanim, which is beside Kadesh. Now this is the family that Moses had married into over in Midian, and some descendants had come to live in Israel's inheritance after they went into the promised land. And they reported to Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera gathered together all his chariots, 900. Did he mention he had 900 chariots? I mean, those are like tanks. Tanks of iron, chariots of iron. And all the people who were with him from Harosheth Haggayim to the river Kishon. So makes you wonder, if you're reading this, whether the Kenite is going to be a double agent or an ally of Jabin. You don't really know at this point. Then Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. So here she is out there. Wonder what the men must have thought. Deborah's calling the shots. And it says, and the Lord routed Sisera, all his chariots, all of his army with the edge of the sword, right before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. It's not just a win, it's a rout. So how are those chariots working out? It makes you wonder how they defeat all those chariots. Well, we see something back in Joshua chapter 1. Joshua chapter 11. Joshua chapter 11. And that is the, they learned a thing about chariots. When they had 1 horsepower engines, which is what they had, they found out that you could just huff the horse, cut the tendon, and a horse wasn't so useful anymore. Couldn't pull the chariot, really couldn't do anything. And so that's what they learned in Joshua chapter 11. So chariots weren't any big deal if you had a brave soldier with a sword who would go up and get close enough to the chariot to take care of the horse, so they couldn't pull the chariot anymore. You know, you see the medieval movies where they got the armor on the horse, and everything, but the legs got to be free. And so anyway, they routed the army with all of these chariots. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Haggayim, and all the armies of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. That's a big success right there. I don't care how you look at that. That's a big success. However, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, double agent or ally. We don't know. We don't know. But we find out here, he went to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, for there is peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber, the Kenite. Now, the Kenites had snitched on the Israeli army's presence, but Deborah had said, here's where they'll be. And so for Deborah's prophecy to be correct, there had to be a snitch that said, go meet them there. And that worked. Sisera is quite certain that the tent of Jael is a safe place. And here's where it gets good, I'm telling you. And Jael went out to meet Sisera, he's the general, and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not fear. And we had turned aside with her into the tent. She covered him with a blanket. I mean, how sweet. She aggressively offers assistance. She's respectful and extra hospitable. And by the way, there's no lie there, is there? No, there's no lie. But then he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a jug of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the door of the tent. And if any man comes and inquires of you and says, is there any man here? You shall say no. So now she's got a guard duty as well. But this is hospitality plus. But then Heber's wife took a tent peg, took a hammer in her hand, and went softly to him, probably brushed his head a little bit, probably patted him on the back. He thought, I'm just in the right place right here. And then drove the peg into his temple, and it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary, so he died. You can't see, it's kind of dark. ChatGPT, he drew that for me. Makes you get that hammer, see, went into his temple. So when Deborah warned that a woman would get credit, well, Deborah was out there calling the orders, one woman, and Jael is the one that takes out the general. And nobody remembers, probably almost nobody in here remembers the name Barak from the Old Testament. Except that it sounds so much like Barak, you might have kind of caught that, latched onto it over the years. So he died. And then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man whom you seek. And when he went into the tent, there lay Sisera dead with the peg in his temple, and that was at the hand of a woman. Just like Deborah said. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. So Jabin's strength was General Sisera, and Israel's strength was God. From the mouth of Deborah, a woman. The real hero in this. But the real lesson here is not about women or anything else. It's about never underestimate decisive leadership. People do incredible things when they're decisive. Sometimes you're decisively wrong, and sometimes you're decisively right. But if you're decisively right more than you're decisively wrong, great things happen. And that's why we shouldn't be wishy-washy. We know what our principles are. We know what the Word of God says. We know how we're supposed to live our lives. We know what is harmful to our Christian ethics and to our Christian testimony. We know what that is. And we stay away from it. November the 10th, just last week, was the Marine Corps birthday. We had in boot camp, we had to recite from the X1. Were they still doing that when you were in boot camp? Yeah. From the X1, and in the X1 it was all the basic stuff about the chain of command and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. And one section of the X1 was Marine Corps was established in November 10th, 1775 in Tunn's Tavern, which is, I guess, why every Marine Corps birthday. Now, I don't know that any of the other branches of the armed forces make a big deal out of their birthday. I mean, does the Army even know what date the Army was established? Does the Navy know? Marines, every Marine knows. You can ask anybody who's in the Marine Corps, what's the Marine Corps birthday? Every one of them will know. And how do you celebrate? They get drunk. Therefore, I worked every Marine Corps birthday. People say, "Hey, Turner, can you cover for me?" Cut the cake? And cut the cake with the sword. Yeah. Never underestimate decisive leadership, because in the case of the Marine Corps, they had the reputation of, we just do what we're told. And when you get a platoon of Marines going out into battle, feeling like that platoon leader is smart and knows what's best, not always the case, but if that's what you think and he's decisive, man, they'll follow you. And that's what I learned in the Marine Corps, that decisive leadership is really, really important if you're going to get things done. And so when it comes to decisive leadership, I knew when I was in the Marine Corps, I knew when I was 23 years old, I knew that right or wrong, be decisive. Try to study up so that you can probably be right. That helps. Because if you get it wrong too many times, people don't want to follow you. I get that. It makes sense. Never underestimate decisive leadership. Let's stand together, please, with our heads bowed and eyes closed.